Hi, good afternoon, everybody. It is 2:02. We will wait just 10 more seconds to see if there's anyone else that's going to be joining us this afternoon for the Land Use and Natural Climate Solutions Working Group. All righty. We will go ahead and get started. Well, thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Michael De La Rosa, and I will be opening up our workshop today. And then I will be handing it off to our project team staff, who will continue and work with you through this afternoon to have hopefully a productive and discussion on the topic. We look at it for thank you for joining us for our final workshop for our land use and natural climate solutions. I do want to note for all those participating that we are recording this meeting and it will be posted on our engagement site and be available for public viewing. Before we get into welcome remarks, I do want to note that we will be providing language translation today, and I'd like to go ahead and introduce our interpreter, Giovanna. Giovanna, if you will unmute yourself and explain the instructions in regards to selecting a language and the process today. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Giovanna Wormsbecker, and I'll be your Spanish interpreter during this meeting. In order to provide language access, this meeting will have simultaneous interpretation from English to Spanish. Please note that the translation globe will not appear until after I've read through all language instructions. Therefore, we're asking that everyone joining us for this event, please select your preferred language to facilitate hearing presenters and participants clearly. If you're on a laptop or a desktop, you will see a globe at the bottom right of your screen. Please click on the globe icon that says interpretation and select English. If you're on an iPad or a similar device, locate the three-dot menu on the upper right and select language interpretation and then select English. When it's your turn to speak, please remember to be loud and clear and speak at a moderate pace, as the interpreter will be interpreting simultaneously into the other language. Buenas tardes a todos, me llamo Giovanna Wormsbecker y seré su intérprete en español durante esta reunión. Esta reunión contará con interpretación simultánea bidireccional de inglés al español. El globo de traducción no va a aparecer hasta que se haya leído todas las instrucciones en los dos idiomas. Por lo tanto, pedimos a todos los presentes que seleccionen su idioma preferido para facilitarles escuchar a los presentadores y participantes con claridad. Si están utilizando una computadora, verán un icono en la parte inferior de su pantalla a la derecha en forma de globo que dice interpretación. Haga clic ahí y seleccione español. Si está utilizando un iPad o un teléfono, localice el menú de 3 puntos que aparece arriba a la derecha. Haga clic en interpretación de idiomas y elija español. Cuando sea su turno de hablar, por favor recuerde hablar con voz fuerte y clara y a un paso moderado, ya que el intérprete estará interpretando simultáneamente el otro idioma. Thank you.
Michael, you're muted.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It does happen, but thank you very much. Appreciate that. As I was mentioning, we will be using a variety of methods to hear from you today. You will have the same features whether you're joining from your computer or your cell phone. You can type in your thoughts using the chat feature, which is located at the bottom of your screen. If you are joining by cell, you can select the 3 dots at the lower right of your screen to open up the chat. If you would like to speak over the audio, please use the raise your hand option, also located at the bottom of your screen. If you are calling in, please enter *9. Additionally, we will pause in between our speakers to ask you questions and hear your thoughts. The majority of our times will be focused on hearing your comments and answering your questions the best that we can. And here are the same features, but from the mobile view for anyone who may be joining from their mobile device through the Zoom app. If you select more on the bottom taskbar in Zoom, you will see the options to chat. Select your language of choice and raise your hand to indicate you would like to speak. Alrighty, so there you go. Thank you for allowing me to explain these features for you. So again, my name is Michael De La Rosa, and I'm part of the project team here at the County of San Diego Land Use Environment Group. part of the team to help move the regional decarbonization framework forward. Today, you will also be hearing from Mirza Baksamusa, the program manager for the Regional Sustainability and the Land Use and Environment Group Executive Office, and including Scott Anders, the Director of Energy Policy Initiative Center at the University of San Diego. We also have a few presentations prepared for you by San Diego State University and the San Diego Audubon Society. Before we get started, I'd like to take a minute to just set the stage for how these working groups are structured and our agenda for the day, and also remind you that we are continuing to use this platform to post our working group documents, recording, as well as the material to be reviewed. If you have any questions on registering to the site and accessing your working group documents, please send us an email and we will help you through that process. As some of you may already know, and for those who are joining us for the first time this afternoon, we have set 5 special topic working groups to focus on key emitting sectors and solutions for addressing our climate change. These will categorize and guide the development of the implementation playbook, with a draft ready by the end of the year. For today's agenda, we will begin with 2 invited guests. Our first guest, Dr. Maria Kalinaya and Andrew Meyer. After presentations, our consultant, Scott Anders from the Energy Policy Innovation Center at USD, will discuss their approach to the implementation playbook and the draft matrix of the decarbonization actions for the land use and natural climate solutions sector. Mirza will then facilitate an open discussion where we would like to hear from all of you. With that, I'd like to hand it over to my colleague, Mirza, to introduce our speakers. Mirza?
Thank you, Michael. So really excited about this program today and this topic, and some of our team members in the county are very excited about this particular topic, because we're trying to lead by example, for example, through our food systems initiative and our in trying to coordinate the decarbonization framework with the larger river park and conservation. So these are ideas that some of us are trying to gather and see what it is we can do at the county as well. So with that, I want to hear that there are many stakeholders and experts, and some of you have already heard this new approach, our knowledge that we want to seek from around the country and the world. The format of this workshop is where we flipped the role such that the stakeholders present and the government listens, is a pilot of our own. So I hope that you will come along with us in this journey to explore these new ways of public outreach. If this is successful, we will be building an online repository of ideas on Ideas Bank with 5 to 7 minute presentations followed by questions from the moderator that will be me today. So with that, I have the pleasure to introduce to you Marina Kalunia. Dr. Kalunia graduated with honors in microbiology from the Dnipro National University in Ukraine. She is a professor of microbiology and lead of the C1 Biocatalysis Laboratory in the Department of Biology at the San Diego State University. Her unique expertise includes microbial genomics and physiology, systems biology, and metabolic engineering of microbes that consume single carbon compounds such as methane and methanol. Dr. Kalunia's research efforts include the development of novel sustainable approaches for capturing greenhouse gas emissions and conversion into value-added products. She's also the author of more than 100 scientific publications, book chapters, and numerous patents related to microbial methane conversion. So thank you. We're really honored to have you here to hear your ideas, Dr. Kalunia.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It is my great pleasure. And thank you for wonderful introduction, Michael and Murtaza. It's really great to be here and talk about what I envision as C1 biotech, which is a very blooming area at the moment. And I'm having opportunity to discuss what also was for at least 20 years of my main topic of research. I like to bring two images on my first slide, and those two images, it's microbes, and as a best solution to deal with what we know one of the biggest struggle of our current climate problems is methane. And I would love to emphasize one more time that we all know now that methane is 84 times more potent than CO2 when we look at 20 years time frame, and we don't have more than 20 years to deal with climate change at the moment. Next slide, please. Why we wonder about methane, why we should think about methane. Methane, we all know, is a very powerful greenhouse gas. Here on the graph, which I put together from ITC report prepared for Paris Congress quite a few years now, you can see red and blue. And this red and blue represent contribution of CO2 and methane to climate change. And 45 means that significant portion of this impact comes from methane. Even so, methane is relatively small in concentration in the environment, in our atmosphere. This contribution seems to be the one of the most significant one. This is why, if we look forward for what we can do to deal with climate change now, how we can terminate and expand time for ecosystems to adapt, methane becoming this essential target number one. And you might see it on many news, which like the lowest hanging fruits that comes from European Union. One of the most effective things we can do to reduce near-term global warming. That's every time when we talk about it, that comes back to the simple molecule, which is methane. However, when we will look where those molecules come from, significant portion of it comes from our fuel recovery energy. But if we will look down on the graphs, that would be animal husbandry, agriculture, biomass burning, waste and landfills, which contribute humongously to methane emissions. And all those contributions comes from biology, comes from microbes which produce methane. And that, as a microbiologist, that clearly tells me we disturb our ecosystem in a such way that we give advantage to some microbes to produce methane. And at the same time, we left behind microbes which consume those in nature. Next slide, please. And it's just an example. We all know that cattle is one of the biggest challenge in methane emissions. In US, livestock include 94.4 million of cattle. And I did very simple calculation. Each cow will produce about 200 to 500 liters of methane per day. If we will count for all population of cattle, that would be about 1,166 million cubic feet per day. How big it is? This is all residents of California, amount of methane residents of California consumed per day as natural gas. It's exactly the same amount. Can you imagine whatever you use today as a natural gas, you just open and release it to atmosphere. If you will look on Delaware, the population of Delaware will use the same amount of methane per month. The input is indeed really big one. Can we go to next slide, please? So now we know that US pledged early this year to reduce methane emission with the biggest initiative pledge 30 by 2030. This pledge was supported by European Union and more than 100 countries around the globe. But the biggest question is how we can do it. And it goes in many different directions. Of course, we have to reduce venting and flaring. This is from energy recovery. We have to tighten nuts and bolts, and engineers contribute incredibly well to this part. This is your natural gas delivery pipelines, how we can make them more sustainable, less leaks. And of course, when my expertise come along, how we can apply biology. We know that in nature, microbes consume methane, and we kind of ignore them in our ecosystem. But now how we can restore the balance by bringing those microbes back, and in many of our industries, from fossil infrastructure, livestock, and agriculture. Next slide, please. And I work with microbes which are methane consuming. This is my passion, this is my area of research, and people often ask where you can find them. And I like to say everywhere in nature. Just look around, you grab soil, and you will see methanotrophic bacteria there. We know that methane-consuming microbes are incredibly beneficial for animals and plants. We also know that they are well established as animal feed. At this moment, we can say that there are two big, large-scale biotech companies, one in European Union, Unibio, and another one in US, Calista, build those technology to produce single-cell protein as animal feed. They are excellent sort of protein, and they're known to be at the large-scale fermentation and proven to work on the large-scale fermentation. Can we go to next slide, please? And that basically gives me an opportunity to discuss, when I was encouraged to think about the solutions, that we can bring those microbes back into our everyday life in 3 different areas. And I'd like to highlight all those 3 areas. One of them is capturing, another one is conversion, when feedstock is methane is significantly large, and preserving. And I will go over all of those solutions in a moment. Next slide, please. One solution, and this is when we think about cattle, what can be done at simple animal farm? You have animal farm, you have a pollution which is manure. This manure, we have to treat it as anaerobic. Best waste will be anaerobic digester, which produces biogas as a source of methane. If we will bring microbial fermentation here to recapture this methane, to produce feed, which I just mentioned to you, is very well established feed for animals. It can be utilized on the same farm. This is a wonderful, in my opinion, example of completely circular ecosystem, which on an animal farm can bring those emissions down, which currently contribute significantly to overall climate change. Next slide, please. With the second one, I'm kind of taking you even further. If we will look on methane, what can be done out of it? And I like to think, and I encourage my colleagues also to think about methane as a wonderful feedstock. We used to use sugars, we used to use agriculture as a feedstock to produce fuel. We can go beyond that. We can take waste and waste producing and waste sources as a waste treatment, water pollution, water treatment is another example. Was all produced biogas, significant source of methane. This biogas can go to the system. You can look at it as what we call it as a bioreactor, to produce a number of wonderful molecules out. And I just given you an example. My team was able to work out, cooperate with different companies, our other colleagues at San Diego State University. For example, production of single-use packaging, our polymers, our plastic, our production of fibers and coating, also as a focusing on more sophisticated nanotech sensors for electronics. All of them, again, not only close the cycle in our systems, they also utilize what we emit in the environment at the moment. We can couple it with renewable energy to reconvert even CO2 that comes out from microbial respiration back into system, back to the production of final product, making everything more sustainable. Can you go next slide, please? And just an example, this is something that I summarized from my slide, from my lab research. We know that we can produce many different compounds. We can produce polymers, which PHA already mentioned to you. We can produce sugars. We can produce isoprene, meconic acid. All of it can also go into production of new generation plastics. We can produce enzymes. Just slightly looking on what we do today from different sources, reconverting it to utilization of what is greenhouse gas emissions at the moment. And on my left side of the slide, I also show you that we can use those microbes to capture methane from environment. And my student developed that as a system, leaf system, which, as I show you, can be stable, as simple and stable for about 6 months. We didn't measure after that. It continued to be simple, stable after that. But it's even consumed methane from the environment, bringing a completely new way how we can mitigate methane in atmosphere. Next slide, please. I also want to bring one solution, which I think absolutely incredible. We live in an arid ecosystem. And what is arid ecosystem? If we move forward, we talk about land use, and this topic is about land use as well. But as we convert arid ecosystem to agricultural, there is some very important impacts. Arid land is a splendid sink for methane. As we move it to agriculture, it's becoming a source of methane emissions, which very important to remember. One student in my lab found incredible, wonderful phenomena in Anza Borrega Desert near us, in which we know that microbes in desert stimulate plant growth. They reduce requirements for water and at the same time stimulate methane production. We call it as an iSafe, as microbial supplement, which we believe will be critical to implementing for arid crop production pipeline in near future, not only to improve production of crop at low water in drought environment where we live, but also to enhance methane consumption, bringing this natural capability of soil to breathe methane out from atmosphere. Next slide, please. And I want to mention that, of course, our vision goes beyond. I'm incredibly fortunate to have wonderful colleagues at San Diego State University, which takes this idea of taking waste, making simple molecule out of it as the most easy recyclable solution, and united with biofermentation to build completely new array of products which we currently produce from fossil fuel. And of course, with that, it will be my last slide. I would like to thank you for listening to me, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'll just say Marina.
Yes, yeah, Kalyuzhna, I know that it's a very difficult name, but you did incredibly well on pronouncing it. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Kaluznia. So I wanted to just emphasize the importance of reducing methane because of its, especially in the short term, significant impact in getting climate change under control, and also the United States as part of 30 countries in last COP Climate of Parties pledged to reduce methane by 30% by 2030. Now, we know that's not enough, but nonetheless, taking methane in control is significantly important for keeping the temperature under control. So with that kind of importance of methane, really appreciate you giving this kind of perspective. Could you highlight specific ideas? Like, there are many practitioners here, agencies on our calls, and they would like to see if there's any ideas or suggestions we can take home for action for this in terms of this methane.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe there are two things which I wanted to highlight today, and it came out when we discuss ideas for a new startup company, especially around dairy farm, in form of how we can embed, how we can implement methane utilization where methane is produced. And surprisingly, I heard something that for me, for scientists, was like somewhat more challenging. I thought that people like let's make our environment much better, but I know that it's more idealistic way of thinking about everything. One concern which was raised is, you know what, the farmer will not take your technology because it might add additional cost. And I figure out that we do have gaps. We do have significant gaps in communication between people who produce our milk and people who develop and think about ecosystem and environment. And I'm not saying those people, bad people, are those people, they're very naive people and do not communicate. But I believe what you do, guys, is incredible to uniting, to bringing and discussing and making sure that people can connect and can see potential and maybe be open for new initiatives which might come out from novel biotechnologies. And this is where I think the county might contribute more. I love to go to Department of Energy workshops, and what they typically like to do, they like to bring farmers to discuss and talk directly to scientists, and then those farmers becoming people who transform this idea and talk to their peers, delivering new initiatives directly to the field. And I know that farmer will listen farmer much better. And I think that I would love to see that happening as well. I would love to talk to people, and I would love to see some of those technologies moving forward, as even as a trials, to be embedded, to be more acceptable. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. I wanted to just talk about gaps. You mentioned gaps, but in terms of gaps in our knowledge,
Mhm.
particularly, I'll just give you an example. And our project is called decarbonization. And when we did our modeling, it was focused on carbon dioxide, right? So it's not focused on carbon per se. And part of the problem is, I think, the lack of ability to inventory methane. So I just want to step back in terms of big picture. What are the gaps of knowledge, and what are the ways we can learn from what your research shows?
I would say we do have wonderful baseline knowledge about how we can grow microbes in the lab. We also have a relatively well-established technology to use large-scale methane sources. However, when we think about farms, we need to come up with a solution which is between, which is simple, acceptable, and at the same very easy to implement. And if you will ask me today where I will put my money, I would love to dedicate my research. I would love to sit down with great engineers and build a very simple system which people can take and embed directly at their farm, if it can be embedded directly at wastewater treatment, small scale wastewater treatment, something that needs to be simple. This is one of the biggest challenge across this area at the moment. The second biggest challenge is also, can we build technology which can stimulate methane consumption from environment? Yeah, that's, people think about it. There are different ways how people discuss about it. Is it possible? Can be it done? And again, there are several initiatives which never went beyond the lab scale at some point. It would be nice to see bigger implementation for that. And I would love to see this gap also filled up, and kind of feeling requirement to mitigate not only CO2, but requirement to mitigate methane emissions. And very often maybe not only at point sources, even point sources may be more significant. And this is where we should target first, but also just let's reduce them. And this is where our iSafe came along very well, I believe, initiative, because what can be simpler than coat your seeds with microbes, which we know we deplete from agriculture now, and bring them back to the environment. I would love to see those field trials to move forward. And if anyone will like to support it, would be a wonderful opportunity to explore how really it can help in the environment. We'd have wonderful outcomes in the lab settings, but I would love to see them in the field. That in other transitions that should happen, in my opinion.
Thank you, Dr. Kurz. I was in terms of your the when you talked about the field, it was primarily presentation was focused on agriculture, and I wanted you to if you could touch a little bit on the picture there about landfills. We have several, like some that are active and some that are retired landfills that are continuously emitting methane. And how do we kind of, in terms of the circular economy, how do you see that maybe as a county we could play a role in bringing everybody to the table to do something about the methane that is being emitted from our landfill in a way that decarbonizes our region as well?
Wonderful. Thank you for bringing that up. First of all, I would like to compliment what county does already. I was in touch with Miramar landfill facility, and I really was impressed that they're already capturing significant portion of methane and utilize it to drive trucks, which is wonderful compliment. Of course, there is still additional methane emission that still continue to comes out. There is a significant, absolutely incredible research which is done in this area, including to embed microbes to cover the surface layer to consume methane emissions further. I'm not sure it's done. I'm not sure even if the research is done in that particular area in our fields, but you bring up very interesting point as well. Yes, that needs to be also explored, because again, if you will look on the map of San Diego State and look on, on San Diego County and look where emissions are, you will immediately see pipelines and landfills. This is what comes out. I would only say, would love to see more initiatives coming out in support of mitigating methane at a smaller scale. And of course, bringing seeds with plants there might be benefit as well too. So
Thank you. That is amazing. Thank you, Dr. Kolznev, for that. If your team thinks of or wants to partner on a demonstration project on methane in landfill, please feel free to reach out. We want to partner.
Would love to. Absolutely. Yes, we would love to. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. So next, we will hear from Andrew Meyer, the Director of Conservation at the San Diego Audubon Society. Andrew has been working on the Hudson River for several years on scenery preservation, connecting aquatic habitat to culvert mitigation and dam removal projects. And then, of course, he's got his favorite bird memories, and I'm going to ask you, Andrew, about it when you're done. All right, thank you for joining us, Andrew.
No problem. Thank you, Murtaza. So can you hear me? Does that work? Yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much. That's very, very awesome and interesting information, Dr. Kaluznaya. Thanks very much. And thanks very much to Michael and Murtaza and Elise for the opportunity to talk. So I think that, or I'm sure that what I can offer, I don't have any novel research myself the way the previous speaker did, but we have an example of a local wetland restoration project that has an important overlap with our climate crisis in a number of different ways, but certainly in terms of carbon sequestration and carbon storage. So, so that's what I'll focus on. The first few slides here are just a quick dive into this particular local project, which we're trying to work with the city of San Diego on, and then I'll kind of zoom out and put it in a little bit of context for carbon sequestration and the climate crisis, and tie it back into the working group, what the working group here is trying to work on. So the Rewild Mission Bay project, kind of long story short, is a wetland restoration project in the northeast corner of Mission Bay. If you'll go to the next slide, the San Diego Audubon Society is a nonprofit group that's been focusing on the birds in particular in Mission Bay for decades. We started this Rewild Mission Bay feasibility study about a decade ago and have been working towards the research and the advocacy and the understanding and the planning that would go into wetland restoration. The backdrop for it, as is important to a lot of the work that we need to do to deal with, to mitigate and adapt to the climate crisis, is that Mission Bay looks totally different than it used to. It's been changed. It feels like a long time for one human life, but really in the 1940s and 1950s, even into the 60s, it was pretty drastically changed, as has been a lot of our state coastline, as has been a lot of the tidal wetland and mudflat habitat throughout the world in recent decades. So this is a habitat that is very rare, even at the onset. It happens when freshwater and rivers are flowing into the ocean. We've got a lot of them in Southern California, but a lot of them are much smaller, much diminished, and much degraded, because these are beautiful places that we all like to be at as well. So that's kind of the backdrop here for this Mission Bay project. This is a map from the mid 1800s, which shows just what the place looked like for thousands and thousands of years. and Kumeyaay Native Americans were living alongside these banks and interacting with these habitats and these resources for a long, long time. If you go to the next map, this is what it looks like in more recent history. But the air photos here give a quick glimpse as to how much terraforming, how much change we've done like I said, in a lot of coastal lagoon and coastal estuary ecosystems in Southern California. Mission Bay is just one example, but it's a really good example to look at how since the 30s into the 40s and 50s, like I mentioned, our habitats have changed drastically. And the impact here for this kind of talk is that, we started this project because it impacted birds. We're a bunch of bird lovers for sure. We connect that bird impact to the wildlife and the habitat that supports that wildlife. But we definitely got interested in this project because of the endangered species that live there. But if you go to the next slide, the change from the habitat that Mission Bay was, which was much shallower and much more tidal, to a much deeper in-water habitat and a shoreline now that is much sandier and much rockier. So basically, we put riprap where we don't want the tide to change things, and we put a sandy shore where we want to interact with the bay, and then we made the rest of the bay much deeper. So we have lost a lot. Mission Bay Regional Park is 4,000 acres. In the northeast corner of the bay, where this map zooms into, there is still 40 acres remaining of tidal wetland marsh. It's the last memory of that habitat in Mission Bay. And it's on the left side of this map. If you know the area, it's called Kendall Frost Marsh. It's owned and managed by UCSD. So the Rewild Mission Bay project, again, wrapping up this kind of wetland restoration hoped for project here. This project, the Rewild Mission Bay project, looks to expand and restore that habitat where there's a little kernel of that habitat remaining in Mission Bay. We hope to restore 220 acres or so of mudflat, of tidal wetland habitat, and give that yellow and red habitat a place for those habitats to migrate into as sea levels rise. So that's the background. That's the kind of local example of a wetland restoration project, a tidal wetland restoration project. If you go to the next slide, the reasons we talk about this, we certainly started because there's endangered species that live here, endangered birds, but everybody, a lot of the research throughout the world and in Southern California have talked about what improvement we would get for water quality in the rest of the bay if the water flowed through a tidal wetland. We would get a lot of resilience to sea level rise. This is a map here, small map about what sea level rise 1 to 2 meters will do to Mission Bay, for example, and it's a problem that we'll have all over the place, and it's a problem that we need to start planning for now, which this working group is obviously addressing head on. But we know that sea level rise is something that we need to be planning for, and that riprap and solid walls are not resilient infrastructure, especially compared to a tidal wetland, which is built to flood and ready to flood and doesn't cost anything if it's underwater. But it's also an important example of opportunity to improve equitable access. I mentioned that Kumeyaay folks were living alongside the banks of Mission Bay since time immemorial. This is an opportunity. A wetland restoration project is a great example of ways that we can get people back into a larger and expanded and more resilient marsh so that we can reconnect some of those cultural practices and reconnect some of those communities to a space that's culturally significant to everybody, but especially for Kumeyaay Native Americans. Next slide. Then in recent years, we have realized that tidal wetland habitats are amazingly efficient at sequestering carbon. So this is a quick slide looking at what emissions, what the carbon sequestration, the burial rate of carbon in habitats compared habitats. On the left, it's forest habitats, and I'm from the East Coast. Forests are the obvious carbon sequestration habitat, says me. But since I got here and started working on this Rewild Mission Bay project, it turns out that salt marshes, which is what we're talking about in Mission Bay, and other kinds of tidal habitat like seagrasses and mangroves, tidal and subtidal habitats are amazing at burying carbon away and locking it away for hundreds and hundreds of years. And as Dr. Gagliazzana mentioned, we're talking about on the order of decades, or, we have less than decades to deal with this issue. So locking away a substantial amount of carbon in these natural habitats, even if we're only talking hundreds of years and not forever, will definitely help put us on the path of short-term mitigation that we need to be moving towards. So salt marsh there is in the middle. And so it's a logarithmic scale on the left. So they're very efficient at locking away the sediment and the dead plants and animals and the carbon that is associated with those materials in the marsh as the marsh rises year by year with inputs to it from plants and animals and from sediment coming down from freshwater streams and coming in from the tide. Next slide, please. So the way that we have been interacting with this and the way that I have definitely been diving into this issue a little bit, I'm not a wetland scientist at all, but we have been supporting the city of San Diego in their new climate action plan. They have a plan from about 6 years ago, and they just recently passed their update to that, a 5-year plan in August of 2022. And in that plan, their climate action plan, strategy 5 deals with natural habitats. And so if you, it's quite small on the screen, but this teal color is what strategy 5 is looking at adding to this deficit that the city of San Diego needs to reach for their climate action plan. The other pieces here that are missing are the other 5 strategies, the other 4 strategies, and then strategy 6 is what needs to happen below this line. So there's a lot of other activities and other actions that the city needs to take, which make up the bulk of this deficit, which we need to reach. But strategy 5, including wetland restoration, is on this plan, and it's a requirement for the acreage now of tidal wetland restoration that the city needs to meet in order to eliminate and deal with this slice of the problem that we have. And up there at the top are the 2030 and 2035 targets. So the city of San Diego committed to 700 acres of wetland restoration by 2035, tidal wetland restoration, which we think is great. We would love to work with them on doing some of that right here in Mission Bay. But what's important about this as well, it's a thin line, but it also has all of those other benefits that we were talking about earlier, the ones that got us jazzed about this at the very beginning. So there's a lot of co-benefits to it, but it also is the only strategy in the city's plan, at least, that is talking about going negative. So this is not about, and we need to deal with this certainly, but this is not about lowering the emissions that we have from our other necessary pieces of our development and our lives and our communities here in San Diego. It's about sequestering some of that carbon that will have to be emitted from many of the other pieces of our lives here. We need some habitats, we need some spaces that will go negative and sequester those carbons, not just lower the amount that we're emitting, but also take some of those emissions away and lock them away. So this is what's exciting and significant about this habitat and these kinds of habitats in particular. Next slide. Yeah, and so a lot of the research that went into this and the quantification was done by EPIC, and I know they are here and involved in this working group as well. So this research that went into the references and whatnot, and the quantification here was heavily involved, heavily created by EPIC, which is fantastic. One more slide. And finally, some tables and charts. So if you do, these are 2. The top one is the one from the EPIC report, which was just on the other slide. And the bottom one is preliminary data from research that's going on in Kendall Frost Marsh in Mission Bay, as well as some other places. So this is preliminary research. It's not been published yet, but suffice it to say that just like Dr. Marina was saying earlier, there's a lot of research that needs to happen, not only about tidal wetland habitats, but all of our other habitats as well. They emit some methane, they emit some carbon dioxide, certainly, but they also sequester a lot. At the moment, tidal wetland habitat was the only habitat that made it into the city's climate action plan because there was enough research there to quantify what it would do per acre. But this information here, if you go one more slide, just lots and one more slide, lots of information here that's coming out as people are researching and trying to understand how the habitats change over time, how they change in relationship to their management history, and how they change in terms of depth and how much fresh water is going into them. These 2 comparisons here in these red boxes are just to highlight that in the top one, which is the information that was available for the city plan, just over 1 megaton of carbon per acre is what's average for tidal wetland restoration. But in the bottom box here, at the top of that one, Mission Bay, a few of the samples that have been looked at so far, and a lot more research has to go into this, is seeing perhaps 3-4 times more carbon being sequestered per acre than that average of this. The research I think Epic cited here was from San Francisco Bay. So not to say that we're guaranteeing any amount of number that we'll be able to reach, but there is some heterogeneity in how much carbon is sequestered per site, and we need more research in order to figure out the management and the restoration goals that can improve the amount of sequestration that happens and get 8 megagrams of carbon per hectare as best we can, as long as we're also delivering on that access, that water quality restoration, the resilience, and the bird habitat. If you ask us, we would say bird habitat should be in there for sure. But if you go one more slide, I think this is it for me. I just wanted to emphasize that there's research going on. And if you click one more slide too, that's the end. There we go. So I just wanted to emphasize that the tidal wetland habitat is just the example habitat that we have some research on so far, enough to quantify and say, yes, this kind of habitat helps us go negative, helps sequester more carbon than it releases, and can help sequester some of the carbon that we will be emitting to the atmosphere for a long, long time. And it's also a positive project. All the rest of the strategies in the city's plan, for example, are positive in that there's jobs created, there's good results for carbon capture and carbon sequestration. But this particular project is a project that brings people together, it restores habitat, and it provides all these other co-benefits in addition to carbon sequestration. So we think it's critical for that. And so do a lot of other players in this. There's a lot of grant funding out there to do this kind of coastal resilience, coastal habitat restoration, and improved access opportunities. So we would love to work with anybody. And I know there are other projects going on just like this one that are farther along and more nascent in the county of San Diego, certainly. So we hope that it's an example project that will get repeated in lots of places. So I think that's it for me, Murtaza. Oh yeah, references. So this will be shared digitally for anybody who wants to jump into some of the details there.
Thank you, Andrew. Really appreciate this holistic, comprehensive perspective that brings everybody together, which is kind of the theme of this decarbonization framework: community, different environmentalists, different kind of stakeholders than just about sequestration on rewild projects. So the information and your experience in that rewild, do you have any suggestions for action on something similar using natural climate solutions?
Yeah, so I see that Mary from Wild Coast just put information here, and I was ready to answer this, Murtaza, just by saying that I emphasized that we need more research, but that research, we have enough to know a little bit about how these kinds of habitats generally sequester carbon and how they generally function. But Wild Coast in particular is leading more research in a couple of other tidal wetland ecosystems, and they've started restoring 40 acres or so in Los Penasquitos, I think it is, Mary. So there's a couple of dimensions here about projects that are moving along and how big those projects are. The county is in rough shape in that most of these opportunities for wetland restoration are in city land, so cities all along the coast. And I know that's a big barrier to the county getting involved. I've talked to many of the supervisors and many of the staff, and it's an easy project from the county's perspective to say, yes, totally, because they're not the ones who will hear about the other land uses that folks want to happen here or the changes in land use that will happen here. But it would be great for the county, and I think this is kind of a policy question. I'm sure it's complicated, but we want the county to get the carbon credits, whether it's money directly or whether it's goes into their climate action plan and shows up as some of that loss, that sequestration, the negative emissions that happen from this kind of restoration. We want the county to get some of that if they foster these kinds of projects. So whether the local cities who have more land use control over these kinds of habitats, whether they would allow sharing of those benefits if funding came in or if policies came in that promoted them, that would be a great way for the county to help support these projects up and down the coast of San Diego. even though they don't have the local municipal control over the property. But a lot of funding and a lot of policy and a lot of momentum can happen from a county perspective, especially if they would then get some of that sequestration and emissions benefit into their plan, if they help bring those projects around. So that would be fantastic, and it would help put some of these cities on the path towards more of these kinds of projects, knowing that the county was there supporting these kinds of projects with funding and, again, with momentum and outreach for these kinds of projects. So that nature-based solutions, tidal wetland restoration is a perfect example of a nature-based solution. There are lots of other ones which we didn't go into here. But those ones, a lot of those ones, especially the coastal ones, will have to happen on municipally controlled and city controlled properties. So the county's role for policy, momentum, funding, those kinds of things will be important for those.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And it's also the question about blue carbon and how it's studied and underutilized as sequestration measure, as well as carbon capture. We had this discussion for a very long time, right from the time we started this project, because oftentimes that is kind of the understudied issue. When I went to several city councils, like such as Imperial Beach, we were specifically, there were questions about how can they be partner on blue carbon issues. When there's jurisdictional agencies such as the port, they have several wetlands under port jurisdictions. I'm not sure about San Elijo Lagoon, whether that falls within the county's jurisdiction. Nonetheless, the county is one of the entities in this effort on decarbonization, and that is a question that can be addressed by other agencies too. So this is not just about the county implementing it. So definitely. With that, yes, thank you. So I want to appreciate this topic, and I want to ask you if there's case studies outside our region that you could kind of point us to about how this kind of a multi-agency, multi-jurisdictional collaboration could help in this effort. Yeah,
great setup and great question. So I guess a couple of quick things. Wild Coast organizes a group of folks that are now from far around the world in their previous meeting or in their recent meetings, but it was focused on Southern California at the beginning. There's a blue carbon kind of working group that they organize a quarterly or several times a year just Zoom meeting to share some of those local projects. So I can help you get in touch with Wild Coast and get into those meetings or anybody if they're interested. But thank you to Wild Coast for organizing that group. One of the great examples of a state, of a kind of state level project is just north of us in Oregon. They have put blue carbon into their natural and working lands policy. So that one is an example of a statewide effort that is starting to and has quantified and gone through all of the rough and tedious rigmarole it's going to take in order to say this kind of tidal wetland and this kind of chaparral habitat and this kind of freshwater wetland is all translates into this much carbon sequestration and this much storage over the course of its life. For what information they have available, they have put especially the blue carbon and the coastal component to it into their statewide plan. So that's a good example of a state that is dealing with this along their entire coastline. And that plan is available. And I know that some of those folks are the folks that have been involved in the Wild Coasts, shared at the Wild Coast meetings about blue carbon. So there's a couple of examples. I know it's been in the newspaper too, that in Virginia, the groups like the Nature Conservancy are starting to get and quantify and get the carbon credits for wetland restoration. So they also, the Nature Conservancy, obviously that big organization, has an example project they've been working on for several years in order to get to the point where they can say, we're going to restore X amount of acres and it's going to be worth this much. But one thing I would also add to this is that for our project, for Rewild Mission Bay, there are lots of grants out there that want to get at this kind of thing: habitat restoration, improved access, coastal resilience. and they're not available for a project that wants to be a carbon credit kind of project. So there's two different kind of, I know the port is very involved in this as well. There are options for carbon credit and banking where folks need options, need to support and need to buy into a project that would be a tidal wetland restoration project. But there's also lots of support from state agencies like the Coastal Conservancy and the Ocean Protection Council and the EPA that want to fund projects that are restoration projects, and you're not you can't get those kinds of projects if you then will turn around and sell those credits for in a carbon baking kind of situation. So whichever way you want to go is fine, but there is lots of funding available for projects that don't need that monetary value from a carbon banking perspective. So that's an option as well.
Thank you. And one final question, Andrew, and this one has got to do with regional collaboration. We just saw a considerable amount of regional collaboration between, like, say, the city and the county on the river, the Central River system. And I kind of want to highlight there both in terms of financial commitment, but also acquisition and kind of taking care of the land itself, which would hopefully change the land use pattern around the river itself. With that, the underlying question here is I mean, if the river can be blue carbon, couldn't we make a case that it is decarbonization? Could we make a case with this? And in terms of regional collaboration, could this be a model for similar kind of decarbonization initiatives?
Yeah, I think that would be fantastic, Murtaza. The caveat being we need more research. I'm not definitely up on all of the research, but I know that there's an important difference between freshwater wetlands and tidal wetlands in terms of the amount of methane that they release. So a tidal wetland was on that first slide as being very, very efficient because they don't emit very much, but they do a great job of locking it away. And that's a distinction between that kind of habitat and a freshwater wetland. But all of the kinds of projects that a group like San Diego Audubon Society is focused on, which is all about wildlife and supporting and protecting places that humans can get into and are valuable to wildlife. All of those places have a carbon storage value to them right now and have a carbon sequestration value per year as they grow and lock away some of that carbon. So right along the San Diego River, riparian habitats do the same and have a value. As far as I know, we just don't know that, and we don't know how heterogeneous it is yet. But with more research, Scripps and UCSD are the ones partnering on the work in Kendall Frost Marsh. Wild Coast is also super involved in that. The more we can get some local examples, the more we can say, hey, these kinds of habitats have value. Here's what that value is. And now we can put it right into our quantification method. So we need that, definitely.
Thank you, Andrew. So we may be already implementing the regional decarbonization framework. We may just not be calling that.
Yeah, definitely. Right? Yeah.
Okay. And I promised to ask you, what is your favorite bird memory?
Oh, yeah. I put that on my, Murtaza asked me for a bio, and I always put in there some weird places that are hard for folks to pronounce just to trip them up as they're introducing me. No, but
back on you, brother.
Currently my favorite bird memory is probably oyster catchers. I used to work on Anacapa Island as part of Channel Islands National Park. So that's where I first met my first oyster catchers, and they're still one of my favorites. So there you go. Thanks, Murtaza.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for that. And that concludes it too. We only had 2 presentations today, but we did them pretty in depth. So there was a lot of interest in the first and both of them presentations. So I'll try to summarize very quickly a little bit of what we're doing in terms of the implementation playbook, and then pause and see if folks want to have a discussion around the 2 presentations. Otherwise, we'll continue with Scott's presentation. So just very briefly, with the support of the University of San Diego's Energy Policy Initiative Center, or EPIC, the implementation playbook we present to the board in spring next year will provide guidance at 3 levels: organizational, business, or government, what they can do on their own. Second, building up on those actions, we will implore community-wide actions for local and tribal governments. And third, emissions know no boundaries. So we will identify those actions we can do from a regional perspective where we can gain efficiencies and greater outcomes for more collective impact. I'll just pause briefly here before I turn it to Scott to see if there's any kind of burning questions or comments on the two presentations we just saw. And I see Craig has patiently waited this whole time. So Craig, if you want, you can come on the audio right now.
Thank you so much. There's so much I saw go into the chat during both presentations. We could probably go on for several hours here, but I've got two statements to make and then one question. The first statement is, from both presentations today, they suggest that a lot more research is necessary. And I would agree, we need to do a lot more research on an ongoing basis. However, that cannot be an excuse for not taking immediate action steps now to reduce methane, CO2, and other sources of carbon in our environment. So whatever the county can do it now while we do research, but also the action steps that we know that can be taken. Second observation, I just want to remind everybody in our meeting today, one of the foundation pieces of work to the regional decarbonization framework is the UCSD study, which makes it very clear that on a regional basis, we need to protect existing undeveloped lands, protect our wildlands, protect our backcountry. If we don't do that, then no matter else what we do, we'll still be going backwards. In other words, stop sprawl now. Absolutely stop it. And the county is the player in that effort because the county controls land use for all the backcountry outside of municipal areas. So with that, I'll get off my soapbox now and ask a question. Lots of the good ideas that we heard from both presentations today, have they been or will they be included into the matrix playbook that was provided as a background to part of our meeting today? Have ideas from these presentations been included or will they be included? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Craig. Yes, of course. Our intent is to have this so that we can take these ideas and send it to our team to be able to process and see where we can fill in the gaps. So that is why that's totally the purpose of this, to include ideas in the three different categories that we have displayed here. So, all right.
Great,
So
thank you. I mean, we'll look for the next versions then of these matrices. Thank you.
Yeah, well, so we won't be able to send you new versions. We're going to be drafting the implementation playbook after this. This is going to be the final event. And then in December, we will be putting out the implementation playbook, which will have a lot of this content in the matrix reflected in the form of the playbook. Okay, so next is Sean. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Dr. B. I just wanted to make a statement on behalf of UA Local Union 230, the plumbers and pipe fitters that are going to build these great systems to do methane capture and creating private business models to go ahead and affect the climate. But I just want to make a comment on carbon capture, carbon sequestration, and methane reuses. That's pinnacle, guys. Let's just be honest. That's pinnacle to decarbonizing. That is what a decarbonized economy looks like. A lot of people in this call and so many meetings that I've been at trying to represent my plumbers and pipe fitters that do natural gas power plants that so many people in this call want to get rid of. Bioenergy, biogas, and utilizing the ability to capture methane and recreating it into a sustainable aviation fuel, a sustainable fuel that can meet people where they're at and farms where they're at, is what's going to create a transition of an industry, not the workers. All right. And I'll make it very clear to those folks out there that are talking about no urban sprawl, none of this and none of that. Look, here's the deal. Americans are coming to California. The population is rising. The need for electricity is going to increase. Your grid is going to sustain instability. The only way to decarbonize, to increase the ability to maintain an American lifestyle, and I'll go back to the Flintstone age, is to use bioenergy, ladies and gentlemen, or you're going to continue down the same systems of the past. So as a representative of our great plumbers and pipe fitters union, to the first presenter, we are ready to partner with you. We are ready to build a demonstration project, and the county has done an amazing job with these workshops, with all of our workers, with all of these stakeholders to have this discussion. We are excited. Bioenergy is the future. Sustainable aviation fuel is the future. And in all of the above, balanced approach to decarbonization is where this country, this great country, is going to go. So I'm going to get off my soapbox. Thank you, Dr. B. An amazing workshop. Thank you to the first presenter. It's about time we're hearing about bioenergy here in this region. So thank you so much. You guys have a beautiful day. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. And thank you for that shout out to Dr. Kaluznia. I will, I have Madison. Madison, do you have any comments on the presentations prior?
I don't necessarily. I have it on the implementation playbook, and it's just a question. Can I still ask that? Okay. Will the implementation playbook have benchmarks and timelines related to all of these approaches, and specific benchmarks and timelines related to all of these approaches? And how will this kind of section of the implementation playbook either affect or be affected by the county's climate action plan as it relates to strategies around building electrification?
We will, sorry, Madison, we're gonna get to the implementation playbook in the next presentation. So if you can hold on to that question, will you be around just for this presentation? Just wait. Or do you want me to respond?
No,
right now?
no, go for it. I can wait. Thanks.
Okay. So then I'll I just had to I just had to have Dr. Kaluznia listen to some of the comments, and since she had to leave, but that's why I took the pause. So let me turn it back to Scott Anders. All right, go ahead, Scott.
Thanks, Murtaza. I wanted to just provide some context to the matrix and tables that went out before the workshop. One of the things we've done is to organize those actions into what we call implementation mechanisms. In other words, this is the how. The action is the what, the mechanism is the how. And we have, analysis and research capital projects, basically building something or doing something, steel in the ground kind of approach. I guess, the projects that Andrew was talking about would fit under capital projects in this case: education, incentives, partner, collaborate, plan, program, requirement, or policy. So there's lots of different ways to take action to decarbonize. And some of these are mutually supportive. Some have direct reductions of emissions, some don't. We'll talk about that in a second, but this is the broad list of 8 categories that we've developed. Next slide. We also have provided 3 criteria to kind of provide a little bit more information about each action. The first is greenhouse gas reduction potential. So this is giving kind of a high level kind of scoring or ranking, if you will, about the relative greenhouse gas reduction compared to other actions. And when we talk about comparison throughout the next couple of bullets here, we mean within the scale. So Murtaza talked about the organizational scale, the community scale, and the regional scale. So when we're talking about greenhouse gas reduction potential, we really want to talk about compared to other actions, say at the organizational scale. We don't want to compare, somebody planting 5 trees with the entire region going 100% carbon-free electricity. That wouldn't be a meaningful comparison. So this is within the scale, and that's true of all of the comparisons we're making here. Well, that's not true. It's true of this one. It's true of cost as well. And I pointed out earlier, but some actions that we've listed may not have direct reductions. So for example, education may be difficult to estimate the impact of education. We recognize that it's a necessary step, but it may not be sufficient to actually reduce emissions. And there are other actions that are more direct or have methodologies to kind of understand that a little bit better. So that's why you'll see some actions do not have a greenhouse gas reduction potential. Next slide. The time to complete, Madison, I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but we will provide information in the playbook about, again, in this context of general information about this particular action. So what is the time to complete? Again, this is a relative scale. It's quicker to add a page to a website than build bike lanes. I'm going to continue that analogy here. And just to kind of clarify the time to complete, we're not necessarily saying, is it something to do in the short run, medium run, or long run? What we're saying is, what is the approximate time to complete the action? The order in which the action is completed is not kind of addressed in the playbook. Next bullet. And the cost to implement, similarly, this is a relative cost to implement an action. Again, to carry on the analogy, it's cheaper to add a web page than it is to build a bike lane. So these are the three criteria that you see in the tables that we've provided, and that will also be included in the playbook document. Next slide. And we just want to emphasize that these are preliminary estimates. They're kind of average, if you will, of a category of actions. Given the list of 580 plus actions that will comprise the playbook, and I think that number is going to go up, do nothing but go up, as we're getting great suggestions even from this workshop. So it's really not possible to comment on all the potential actions in a particular category. So just as an example, if we wanted to increase education about decarbonizing buildings, we could create a page on a website, or we could create a regional campaign with television commercials. And those are very different scales. They're going to cost very different. So when we're saying, when we're providing some information, we're kind of trying to give you some average information, initial screening, kind of just for this initial stage. And any subsequent action would require more analysis, right? If there was a question about the cost, dollar per ton of wetland restoration, there's probably research done out there, but that kind of information is not going to be provided in the playbook. That would be kind of the next level down. It's, using the playbook as a screening criteria. These are the things I want to learn more about. Then you could dig in and take that next action. Next bullet. And we also recognize that there are lots of other considerations when it comes to all of the actions and the kind of things we've talked about today. Even the two presentations today, there are lots of co-benefits to the actions that we've talked about. When it comes to some of the things that may be in the playbook, it's reducing air pollution or air quality issues, environmental quality, public health. But we just want to kind of remind everybody that the primary concern of the RDF is greenhouse gas emissions. We're not trying to say that those other things aren't important. We're just saying that this is the main focus. And we will definitely address some of these things, but the framework is about decarbonizing. And similarly to kind of workforce and equity considerations, we will include those to the extent we can. But again, it's a lot to consider for 600 actions. I think as you whittle down the number of actions or the types of things you want to do, I think it would be more appropriate to kind of ascribe some of these things at that point. But at this initial phase, at least the draft that we have doesn't provide, it acknowledges and provides some information, but not for every single action. So Murtaza, I think that's my last slide. Back to you.
Thank you. Scott, as Scott mentioned, here are some of the actions on a community scale that we send in the matrix. This one is about the natural climate resources from the EPIC database. They've been derived which has been derived from climate action plans, but also supplemented by feedback. I think I mentioned earlier, we're taking the feedback, sending it to a team to see how they can fit in to the matrix. I think it was Craig's question. So this is available for comment directly under the document review tab in the Engage website. And that's going to help inform the playbook. Next, this slide shows the matrix at the community scale, the two categories, carbon removal and storage, and preserve existing carbon stocks. It's kind of like important to kind of, I think, note that when we talk about blue carbon and natural carbon resources, it's the stock that's oftentimes also lost. In a sense, we're part of the reason why we're making the climate crisis worse is because we're releasing the stock that's already in nature. So there's very little discussion or value put on carbon stock itself. Okay, next, this slide shows the regional angle. This is a little bit, once again, we're trying to work out regional solutions. So there's ideas, would like to hear that. Next, we think that the implementation playbook that'll be drafted as a result will be richer with your experience, knowledge, and input on what can better serve disadvantaged communities, and your experience, but also research and development ideas for implementation and data collection, workforce training, education outreach. So if you have ideas for action on all of these, please feel free to let us know in multiple ways through the Engage website, email, call. We can set up a meeting, present to you, as well as this forum. Whatever you put in the chat, we're capturing it and sending it to our team as well as on audio. And with that, I'll give you a kind of a heads up that if you would like to come on the audio, please, with either comment on anything we presented so far or on ideas that we didn't present, please feel free to come put your hand up so that I can call you up. In the meantime, I'll just read Russ Cunningham's comment. Thank you, Russ, for joining us from the city of Oceanside. And the comment is that Russ, if you don't mind, I can read the comment unless you want to come on audio. Okay. So Russ says that Oceanside is working on restoration of Loma Alta Slough and partnering with Carlsbad and other stakeholders on a saltwater flush concept for Buena Vista Lagoon. One of the major challenges with this Buena Vista Lagoon project is the pervasiveness of invasive species in that lagoon. So the question then is, what strategies are available to deal with these kind of invasive species without too much disruption of the native ecology? And I should also mention, when we think about native with that too, there's a lot of research that needs to be done on how do we marry the native value with the carbon sequestration value. Okay, has a lot of comments, and also feel free to come if you want to come on the audio. I'll just read one comment of yours. Please include in the solutions how public transit is needed for people, especially disadvantaged communities, to have transportation to access essential services. We did cover transit. We had a very detailed presentations on transit, Mary, in the last 2 workshops ago. And yes, we are looking at how transit solutions, particularly for disadvantaged communities, should be actions within the playbook. Thank you, Mary. Okay, if anybody else wants to come on audio, this is your final call. Oh, there's couple more homeworks that was sent out. Scott prepared a list of case studies on that could illustrate some of these actions. We are asking for your feedback on these case studies and input on other studies that you may be more familiar with. This document is also available on the Engage website. Scott, if you want, you can come on audio and describe the list that we send out.
Yeah, thanks, Mirza. One of the things that we want to do in the playbook is to provide examples of the kinds of things we're talking about across all of the scales and all of the pathways, or these special topic areas. And so we've tried to develop, say, 3 to 5 related projects. And so for the Land Use and Natural Climate Solution Working Group today, we provided a list of a few. At the organizational scale, we listed the Audubon and the Rewild Coalition project to rewild Mission Bay. We also note that there are lots of, well, let me say that, and this is where we need your help. It's not always, some of the ways we've sort of organized this, there aren't always clear examples. So for example, in the Land Use and Natural Climate Solutions, for an individual organization, if that individual organization doesn't own a lot of land or control a lot of land, it's hard to provide examples. So we would love to get, but we did recognize that there are examples of companies, or in this case, corporations, large corporations who in their kind of corporate giving strategies, or maybe as part of their sustainability plan, help preserve habitat, which is along the lines of what we're talking about today. But as we move down to the community scale, there are kind of some more salient examples, like the County of San Diego's PACE program. So it's the Purchase of Agricultural Conservation Easements. That's a program that's ongoing. There's a City of San Diego has done a pretty nice tree canopy assessment. In fact, I think on the previous, I can't remember if it was this call or the food systems call, but I think it was this call. Somebody pointed that out, and we linked to it and included it as an example. There are many examples of work along the San Diego River as part of the 52-mile long trail from mountains to ocean along the river. We highlighted the Lakeside's River Park Conservancy here. At the regional scale, Sandag has done a carbon sequestration study released earlier this year that did a nice job of providing both, as Murtaza said, what the current storage is, or the current stock of carbon in the natural systems, and then how that's been changing year over year. We also recognize other conservancy examples like the Escondido Creek Conservancy, which preserves land. And we noted the San Diego County Urban Forestry and Arboriculture Project, which is a tree planting program using urban core volunteers to do the work, or workers to do the work. So these are just some examples, probably somewhat representative, but would love to get more feedback, more examples along these lines, in this case, particularly at the organizational scale. Would love to get your thinking on that. So Murtaza?
Thank you very much, Scott. I see Ellie's hand raised. Just give me a minute. Ellie, I'll call on you for coming on the audio. Just wanted to quickly go over some of the state bills going into effect on January 1st that will directly affect natural climate solutions. The first is Assembly Bill 1757, which is the California Global Warming Solutions Act, natural and working lands component of it, which will require the state to develop an achievable carbon removal target for natural and working lands. So we will have that plan going in the next few years. At the same time, the state is also going to develop an urban forestry strategic plan under Assembly Bill 2251. And the third bill is Assembly Bill 2278, which will implement the 30 by 30, which was an executive order from the governor, and every state agency was implementing it. This codifies it into law and frees up some of the resources, and opens up partnerships for conserving 30% of California's lands and coastal waters by 2030 as part of this global effort to combat biodiversity as well as the climate crisis. And with that, I'll turn it over. Ellie, go ahead.
All right, perfect. Can you hear me? Okay, great. That was a great segue, because my question was going to be on how much the strategy and the work plan is looking at federal resources, such as the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and like things like, what would it look like if we utilize the maximum amount of those resources here in San Diego? Is it helpful for us to provide any of those federal resources that we know about?
Absolutely. And what you're mentioning are like practical ways to implement decarbonization using resources that could otherwise just not come to our region, right? This is where we can actually initiate a regional dialogue. So it doesn't matter whether the table is big or small, it is still regional when it's multi-jurisdictional and interest group. So please feel free to and let us know how we can partner. Thank you, Ellie. All right. I see Nelmini has put a comment. I don't necessarily need to read it. You all can click on the link. Is there any other comment on the audio? One final call. Okay. Thank you all. This is super exciting topic and I loved it. I really appreciate a very informed and healthy dialogue we are nurturing through all these workshops of talking together like a family and in order to assess what the challenges are in front of us on climate change and then try to move forward in a way that benefits us all in our collaborative work. So this concludes our second and final workshop in the Land Use and Natural Climate Solutions Working Group. It's actually the last in the series, and our final working group, as I think I mentioned earlier, we intend to have a draft of the implementation playbook released in December. But I also want to give a pitch on the regional convenings. I know Michael is going to come on, but from me, I want to emphasize that these regional convenings that will occur in January by supervisorial district are going to be so important for having all of our voices heard so that the decision makers can learn from them and can act on them. So please do show up and send the word out to your constituents to show up as well. I'll turn it over to Michael to conclude.
Thanks, Marissa. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I think that was a great summary, Marissa. I think we just wanted to highlight that we will have the draft playbook for you in December. This does wrap up our workshops portion in terms of our outreach. As you can see there's a schedule in terms of what's to expect next. So we'll have that implementation playbook in December. And then as Marissa mentioned and pointed out, we really look forward to working with you all and seeing you at our regional convenings. It's really important for us to hear and have people to participate in those. And we look forward to having you there. And then finally, we intend to seek board adoption for the integrated framework in spring of 2023 and to receive direction on regional action. So again, thank you all for showing up today. We hope that this was you felt this was a productive conversation, and thank you as always for engaging. And we look forward to seeing you soon as part of the RDF outreach and engagement process. So thank you, and thank you, special thank you to our speakers today. So everyone, please have a good afternoon, and we hope to see you soon as part of our engagement efforts as our regional decarbonization framework. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.